Thank you guys so much for having me. Mahalo nui loa. It's so unfortunate what happened with Tony, but I'm so grateful actually for the opportunity to speak with everyone tonight and all of my fellow ocean people. I swim as well, I surf, I free dive, I scuba dive. I'm also a marine biologist and I've been working with sharks for a very long time. My dad was a scuba diver. He was in the water all the time, and my mom was a swimmer. My great-grandmother used to swim out to the flags off of Waikiki when they were buoys every single day. Her skin was so thick, she was like a turtle. So I understand the swimming community, and I love it. I try and do as many swims as I can. Like I'll do the Dukes and the North Shore swim series. I grew up northeast side, up Laie, and I live in Haleiwa, and yeah, I feel very lucky. I get to spend so much time in the water with sharks every single day. And again, thank you guys so much, because the information that I learn in research and the information that I learn from spending time with the animals every single day, it's a privilege to be able to share it with more people, to create more awareness and for the sharks, but also to help reduce adverse interaction. So aloha, sorry. I get to travel around the world. I work with sharks not only here in Hawaii, but I travel around the world. I actually work with great white sharks every single season. So the GoPro video was just kind of one clip from one section of the season. But I do love home here, and also being able to share that, especially from the cultural perspective. But from the scientific standpoint, some of you guys may have heard of me before, probably from a GoPro clip that we released from interaction with this particular great white. Her name is Bella. So we have a photo ID of over 175 sharks. So by knowing individuals, we can study individual dispositions or temperaments. So to look at differences within a species across individuals. So there's a little bit more to me, and I know Jada did a wonderful introduction, but just to kind of a little bit of background. So I did marine bio, and then my master's I did ethology, which is animal behavior and psychology and cognitive ecology. So what I look at specifically is the way that the animals interact with one another and also their environment. What I'm looking for specifically on my day-to-day stuff, I'll tell you guys about the research there, but I'm looking at body language and new studies, like how they actually interact with humans. I have a water-inspired conservation group. I'm one of the lead representatives on the International Shark Project. I work with One Ocean Diving, which we have a program that we open to the public. So you guys can actually come out and meet a shark eye-to-eye, face-to-face with an experienced guide and learn more about the animal's biology and physiology. Freediver, scuba instructor, swimming captain, all that fun stuff. So. But tonight, I just want to give kind of a basic, I could talk your ears off about sharks for days and days and days, but I want to give a basic on behavior. And specifically, I'll try and apply it to people that are going in the waters, specifically here in Hawaii. So the current research that's being done, there's basically you could say two research stations. We have UH deploying tags for tiger sharks. So those are spot tags or satellite tags. Those basically transmit a signal. You guys can look at the Pacific monitoring system. You can Google this. And every time the dorsal breaks the surface, it sends a little ping up to the satellite, and we can see the movements of tiger sharks. Now, if you guys go to the website and you look at the website, what you'll actually see is a whole bunch of little dots. Each one of those dots is not a tiger shark. We do not have that many tiger sharks, actually, unfortunately. Unfortunately, there's only about 30,000 left. So when their dorsals actually break the surface, it sends a ping, and then you can actually watch their movements. And when you go and you look at the data that we're collecting currently, it shows that tiger sharks are very migratory, meaning that they move around a lot, meaning that they may have a home range, but that range is very large, and it changes from season to season. That's just one species. We have a lot of different species, over 40 species in Hawaii. So my program, my research specifically focuses on the population status around Hawaii. We have something called the Hawaii Shark Count, which we're going to expand to kind of involve citizen science. So when somebody else sees a shark, they can report it. It can go out into a news feed, and then more people can be aware, hey, there was a shark sighted here. Instead of just that one person maybe telling their friend, we can help reduce adverse interactions. We're currently working on a new permitting to be able to go in and tag. So if there is an adverse interaction, like what happened with Tony, that we can go in there and we can survey for any sharks in the area, and we can tag any large individuals. So for me, from the scientific standpoint, working around the world, that's kind of the best way to approach it. However, if it's a tiger shark, they're migratory species. They can move over 60 miles in a day. So what we want to do instead also, or in addition to, is study their behavior, specifics on how their behavior changes from season to season, from species to species, from gender, from depth profile, and from weather. And so what are conditions that make it more likely to encounter a shark, and what are the best ways to avoid or deter a shark? We're defining and recording a database of agnostic behavior. Agnostic behavior is territorial or predatory behavior. We're doing this by recording with GoPros and other cameras when people are present and when people are not present, so we can see how the animal's behavior changes in the presence of human beings. Now, most of our studies are in the mesopelagic or epipelagic zones, which means that they're in slightly deeper water than most of us generally swim in. Usually the zones that we're swimming in, as you guys, I mean, raise of hands how many people have seen a white tip, a little white tip reef shark when they're swimming, right? There's a little bit more. Okay, raise of hands how many people have seen a tiger shark while they're swimming? Just a couple, right? What about a sandbar shark? Probably, yeah, super rare, right? Because they're more of a mesopelagic or epipelagic species. What about a Galapagos shark? Same thing, yeah, only a couple. Because sharks segregate by depth profiles, generally you're not going to see a shark like a sandbar shark or a Galapagos shark in the areas that we're swimming unless they're following in some sort of fish or an abnormal current. So things like that, as we see these patterns, we want to share them. So just to give you an overview of what I want to go through is I want to explain the behavior through the biology and physiology, through the science, through what we can actually know. We can make a lot of speculations, and a lot of what we're looking at is still theoretical because it is difficult to prove behavior. Behavior changes, and I have to say from working with marine mammals are much more complicated than sharks. So it is actually a little bit more black and white with sharks, which it should be comforting. Because, you know, you go out and you swim with, let's say, pilot whales. Who's heard of an incident with a pilot whale? Maybe not the nicest one, right? You guys have heard about swimmers or divers getting kind of pulled down. So mammals their social systems are much more complex than sharks. However, sharks have been evolving for over 450 million years. So it's a comfort to know that their sensory systems are so evolved. I'll talk a little bit about body language. But I'm not going to get into that a whole bunch. If you guys come out in the boat, I can kind of break that down. And then the shark-human interactions and safety considerations. So I've been diving with sharks for over 15 years. I've dove and worked with over 30 different species, and I've basically compiled down about 7 safety rules and guidelines for people that know that they're going to be in the proximity of sharks. And we've been able to take people out. We take people out at 6 people at a time every single day, 7 days a week. And we have no close calls, no incidences, and it's great training. So just basics on the biology and physiology of the sharks, kind of how their sensory systems are working to interact with us. So they have 2 more sensory systems than we have. They're much more honed, more like dogs. You ever see a dog like stick its head out the side of a car? And it's smelling everything that goes by, right? They have better night vision than we do. Well, it's the same thing for sharks. So I kind of want to talk about how sharks find us. What's the first sensory system that they're using? Well, the first sensory system that they're using, either to find prey or to encounter something or to investigate something, is actually hearing. They can hear us from over 2 kilometers away. If you guys look at the photo at the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the tiger shark going for the albatross. So in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, but even here in the main Hawaiian Islands, When the baby albatross are learning to fly, oftentimes they'll fall into the water and they'll splash around on the surface. And tiger sharks over millions of years have basically learned that, ooh, that's a good source of, is it omega-3 or omega-6? So they got to get that omega-3. Is it omega-3 that's plant-based sources, or is it omega-6? Okay. One of them's seafood only, and one of them's plant-based. But actually, there's another study, and we're specifically looking at white sharks and how they're getting these plant-based fatty acids in their diet, and it's from eating birds. So sharks actually do like chicken, the other white meat. But it explains why, like, on a daily basis that we brief people, you know, don't splash around a lot on the surface. And you guys can just use that as more motivation to fine-tune your technique, right? So you glide in the water, you're not as splashy. I also surf too. I've surfed since I was a kid, and I mean, when we surf, we splash around like crazy, so. But their hearing is very acute. Their sense of smell, they can smell a drop of blood in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Now, when you guys go swimming in your Olympic-sized swimming pool, don't worry, you don't have to look around for sharks, just human sharks. This is kind of a funny picture. But the drop of blood, they can actually detect the differences in what type of blood it is, down to the differences in the species of fish that the blood might be coming to. Interesting study to look up when you have time. They put I believe it was a lemon shark in tonic inability. Tonic inability is a sleep-like state. The shark actually goes on its back and kind of goes in a sleep-like state. It's used for copulation. But they hooked up these little electrodes to their brain, and they measured brainwave activity. And with fish, you would see a brainwave pattern that was extremely erratic. Then they put cow blood on the shark's nose, and they'd see a couple spikes. And they put human blood, and they saw even less. So they don't register, even from a brainwave analysis, they don't register us as a natural prey item. And I can tell you from the behavioral perspective that they don't look at us as a natural prey item. Their eyesight. So they heard us, they're like, what is that splashing around on the surface? Then maybe someone was spearfishing in the area, right? So they're like, I smell chocolate cake. I'm gonna go over there and check it out. All right, now they're gonna come close enough to see us. They'll usually see us before we can see them, unless it's murky water, which does increase your chances that they'll have to come closer, because they do rely on their eyesight as well. Many species have the same number of rods and cones that we do, so we believe that they see in color. I can see a big difference in high contrast colors, like bright white or bright yellow, especially if you're like black and bright white or black and bright yellow. Now that can be a deterrent, but it can also be very eye-catching. If you see a guy walking down the beach and he's in a fluorescent yellow, you know, Speedo, you're probably gonna catch your eye, right? So it's the same thing. It's the contrast and the way that it stands out. We have a safety line that goes off the back of our vessel, and it's got a little white float, and I'll see the tiger sharks from a pretty good distance away. Oh, what is that white thing that's bobbing or floating around out the back of the boat? And they'll go straight up to that. They can see me, they don't want to approach me, but they want to investigate, what is that thing floating on the surface? So the eyesight, also for them, they have something called either a nictitating membrane, which is a lower eyelid, which they can use to cover their eyes. It's a very, very thick eyelid. Or with white sharks or mako sharks, they can actually roll their eyes into the back of their head to protect their eyes. So their faces are very, very sensitive, and they developed these eyelids, or the ability to roll their eyes back, to protect themselves from potential prey items scratching them or whatnot. But generally, they're very, what you would call head shy. Does anybody work with horses? Or even dogs? You guys might be familiar with the term head shy, and that's where if you were to go pet a horse on its head, or maybe approach a dog, they're very wary of their head being touched. Sharks actually exhibit a lot of body language to reduce physical confrontation, because if they sustain a bite to their eyes or their nose or their gills anywhere on the head, that's kind of their ability to find food, right? That could impair, that could be life or death for them. You can tell if a shark, actually I want to go back to this real quick. You can tell if a shark is afraid of you, because as it swims by, it's a mix of curiosity, where they are curious animals, they want to investigate something, but you'll see the nictitating membrane go up. So I've got a lot of footage of a tiger shark, and I can tell the differences in the tiger sharks and their level of dominance. If they're coming in and they're comfortable, they're not protecting their eye. As they come by me, if they're kind of winking at me, it's kind of like they're getting ready for me to maybe lurch out at them. They don't trust me. So just another way to kind of evaluate the animal's disposition. Pressure. As we're swimming in the water, whether it's underwater or on the surface, we put out little waves of pressure. They can actually sense and detect how we're moving. They can tell which direction that we're facing. They're very sensitive to eye contact, but they're used to, over millions of years, working around cetaceans or pinnipeds, dolphins or seals, or turtles. They can tell which direction generally the head is. And that's been proven through a variety of different test mechanisms for predatory behavior in a lot of different species. So generally, a smart predator, you can think of terrestrial or land-based predators as well, like lions or tigers. They're always going to want to approach from behind. And what's your best defense? Would actually be eye contact, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So the pressure of the lateral line, so that's vibrations in the water column. So if you're thrashing around, and who doesn't go to the beach and see all the tourists out in Waikiki, right? And they're splashing around. Well, the shark can actually detect that, and that could be a deterrent or it could be an attractant. So it's depending on how they're looking at it. But generally, they're going to be very, very sensitive, and it's because of their role in the ecosystem. So they're probably most evolved and very special sensory system. You know how dolphins evolved echolocation? They can use sound. Well, sharks evolved electroreception. It's an organ called the ampullae of Lorenzini. It's a bunch of jelly-filled pore pits on their nose, and that gel can actually conduct electricity. So they can actually detect the weak electrical output that every living organism puts out. They use this for their whole role and function in the ecosystem, which is to pick up the dead, dying, weak, sick, injured animals. They keep diseases from spreading, and they keep lower trophic populations like cetaceans and dolphins and fish. They keep them healthy. Disease isn't spreading. Darwin's theory, only the strongest and fittest will survive, right? And they're only designed to be able to pick off those weak, injured, sick ones. Now this ampullae of Lorenzini, that electrical output, now where that factors into us modern day is that when I take someone out swimming, let's say in an aggregate, like a schooling aggregate, an area that I know that sharks like to hang out, if the person's swimming with an electronic device, like a GoPro, the shark's not going to look at the person and be like, oh, that's food, but it might pick up that weak electrical output. And so over 450 million years, they've evolved electroreception, right? Now, most people aren't going to go swimming with electronics, right? I did get that iPod once and strapped it onto my thing, but it's just not practical for what we're doing, right, in open water swims. So generally, you guys aren't going to have to kind of worry about that. But if you do have a shark that's coming close to you and you have a GoPro, you can kind of extend it out, especially if it's on a pole, and just realize that maybe it just wants to come in and check that out. So I'll watch them bump and or occasionally bite the GoPros. But generally, it's enough just for them to come up. And the ampullae of Lorenzini, it's within 6 feet. So it's one of the last sensory systems that they're going to use to determine, oh, is this something that I want to approach? Is it something that maybe I want to bite? Is it something that's potentially edible? So when the shark approaches you, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to bite you. It might just be swimming by to investigate and use the ampullae of Lorenzini. Now, even if your heart rate's racing, don't worry. They're not going to be like, oh, you're the weak, injured, sick one. They actually take in multiple factors. Even if you smell like their food, like working with white sharks, we feed them an internal tag, and so we'll put out a big piece of ahi, like a really big piece of ahi, and we'll put a tag inside of it. And even though it smells like their food, and it looks like their food, they're still going to come up and be like, what is this, what is this, what is this? It's generally an investigation, so they're relying on multiple sensory systems. However, with, bad visibility and maybe fish blood in the area and other things, accidents can happen, but they're very rare. They do have taste buds. Their taste buds are located on the inside of the mouth, on the roof of their mouth, not like us with the tongue. And there's a lot of differences in species. So I don't have enough time to go through every species, but there's over 500 species of sharks. We've got about 40 here in Hawaii. Most of the ones that would be common for us would be like the Sandbars, the Galapagos, the scalloped hammerheads, maybe the black tip. Those guys are kind of rare to see, and then maybe the tiger shark. So there's differences in the body structures. There's differences in their ideal territory that they're using, kind of like how I was asking, like, okay, who's seen this species and who hasn't seen this species? It depends on your activity as well. If you're spearfishing and you're spearfishing off a kind of point, and you're in like 60 to 100 feet of water and you're at the edge of an area that's filtering a lot of current, you're probably going to encounter more sharks there. So it's kind of knowing your area can help as well. Their eyes, there's color differentiations in irises. So like a great white has a blue iris. It can see better in blue water, dark water, as far as blinding contrast. A tiger shark has a yellow iris. That means it's more adapted to predation in low light, and they can actually use the sun, like early morning and late evening, when the water's kind of that yellow color. And they actually blend in really well with that. If you look at their coloration in the water, they blend in very well with that. And their yellow iris can actually block that back, so they have better eyesight. Now that should be a comfort, actually, the fact that they do have better eyesight than we do in low visibility. Even though they may come in closer to investigate, it means that it's, again, less likely that they're gonna make a mistake. And think about the millions of people that go in the water every year. We've got 7 million people that come here. Most of them go in the water. I mean, how many of you guys have been swimming your whole lives? Or the majority of your lives, right? I have. I've been in the water every day since I was a kid. I purposely get in the water every single morning, you know, for the most of the day. I was in the water until about 3 hours ago, swimming around with about 40 sharks. So just testament to their sensory systems. Prey items and predation style, this is really interesting because I not only study tiger sharks here, but also in the Caribbean, also in French Polynesia, also in Australia. And what I'm looking at is, even with the same species, how does it change in their environment? Again, that's kind of weather to behavior, but how does it also change in the area of the world based on the environmental conditions, right? The bathymetry, like what is the structure? Like French Polynesia or Tahiti, the societies are very similar to Hawaii. But the Caribbean, it's shallow white sand, which could be maybe similar to maybe a nearshore coastal area in Hawaii. And Australia, it's across the board in those areas. So it does change. Great whites, their predation style is different in Guadalupe, where it's 150-foot visibility, than it is in South Africa. South Africa, it's limited visibility, and they're relying more on their ampullae and less on their eyesight. So they predate at the surface, and you'll see a lot of them breaching, whereas in Guadalupe, they predate at depth. So even within species, they've adapted their own behavior to rely on other sensory systems. And the same thing would happen with humans, right? If suddenly you were blind, all of a sudden, and they've done these actually studies and things that have happened with humans, if you suddenly became blind, your sense of hearing would increase. It would be more acute, and that's an adaptation to your environment. So considering environmental conditions when we go into their home, into the ocean, is very important in consideration to where you're swimming and what you're doing and what kind of activities. Spearfishing in limited visibility, not a good idea. Preferred territory, this can change. There's a theory for resident versus transient. You see that more in mammals than you do in sharks. And then the approach to humans. Working with mako sharks is extremely hard because they're very fast and erratic. Working with tiger sharks is actually really easy. They're actually one of the slowest species, and contrary to their reputation, they're actually one of the most cautious species in our waters. Sandbar sharks, faster approach, right? And they'll come in schools, which can overwhelm a person. The person's reaction, if you get 30 sandbar sharks swimming at you, is generally not really the best reaction, but we'll talk about that. So a lot of our studies do focus on tiger sharks. We have a photo ID for over 10 years. So generally we're not seeing a lot of tiger sharks. We see the same sharks, but sometimes we'll go periods of 5+ years without seeing a shark. So their movements are erratic, but they do take up a large territory. So generally when we see a tiger shark, it's kind of going to be the only tiger shark. I have had up to 10 tiger sharks at a time, but that hasn't happened for quite a while. Their population trend, just so you guys know, is sadly still declining. And part of that is probably due to longline fisheries, which are offshore fisheries. There are these huge commercial boats with miles and miles and miles of baited hooks. And when they bring in all their hooks, 80% of what they catch is bycatch. And most of that is sharks. Now here in Hawaii, we have a lot of respect for sharks, so no one's gonna buy shark meat, right? It's really high in mercury and toxins, and culturally it's just kind of disrespectful. But they actually do ship it back to the mainland, and I know that from going down to survey at the block. So unfortunately our sharks are still being killed out here, and finning was only banned in 2010. Does anybody know what finning is? Finning? Shark finning? So the Chinese culture, there's a demand for shark fin soup. although it's declined now by over 50% just because of awareness. But they would catch the shark and they would kill the shark just for its fins.
When I was in the Melanesian Islands, I went up there for about a month. And, I was in the Melanesian, the Solomon Islands. The Japanese was training them to fin. And they were destroying the populations of sharks there. And that was about 8 years ago when I was there. We were trying to educate them not to do that.
Good.
So.
Thank you for sharing that education. A lot of people don't realize that it's even going on, but it's going on around the world. And it's decimated most shark populations by over 90%. And there's been a correlation in pretty much every area of the world that's been studied. When they remove sharks, they have a collapse in their fish stocks. And the reason for that is because sharks are basically like the white blood cells of the ocean ecosystem, taking off the dead, dying, weak, sick, and preventing diseases from spreading. So you take them out, what happens if you lose your immune system, right? You get sick, disease spreads, and they have populations collapse. So in Hawaii, just to share this, I'm sure most of us kind of know this, but sharks are traditionally respected as amakua, or kind of like a spiritual guardian, or like an ancestor that came back in a spirit. And they're like part of your ohana or your family. And so if the mano is the Hawaiian name for shark, was your amakua, then you would feed back in the day they used to feed the sharks, they would clean the sharks, they'd protect the sharks, and they had a lot of respect. Unfortunately, a lot of the culture is being lost, and so with that, that's kind of where conservation can step in and science can step in and say, hey, they are important. I mean, the traditional Hawaiians knew that they were important, and they even used them to find Hawaii. And I love all these stories, but they would feed tiger sharks, and then they would lasso them around the belly, and they'd let them pull the canoes. And they'd let them do that for a day or two, because they knew that the tiger sharks would eventually go towards shore. And so when we look at the tiger shark movements, we do notice that the tiger sharks go way out to sea, and eventually they always come back into shore. And then they go way out to sea and then back into shore. And what we think that they're actually doing there is that maybe they're predating on something, and then so that their prey items don't pick up that, hey, there's a tiger shark in the area, they go offshore and they come back at erratic intervals. So in our sampling, what we're seeing is that they'll visit areas, but at very erratic times. And sometimes it's years and years and years between visiting these areas. So they would use celestial navigation at night, and they worked with them. There's really cool journals from Captain Cook going over to Kealakekua Bay and seeing all the Hawaiians swim out with all the sharks and just pushing them down like, oh, just like they're little puppies. So I want to get into shark-human interactions. And what I'm going to do is, as I go through kind of these safety rules or guidelines on how to avoid sharks, I want to kind of implement how this works with their biology and physiology. So number one most basic rule, but honestly, it's kind of like your best line of defense, is to look around and be aware. Imagine that you're walking into an African savanna. You know that there's lions there, right? The lions look around. They look for potential prey items. The gazelles or the wildebeest, they put their head down in the grass, right? They face one direction, and then they rely off of everybody else for somebody to become aware, and then they all flee, right? So be more like a lion, be more like a shark. And when you go into their environment, into their home, into the ocean, where they exist every single day, serving their role and their purpose, look around. And so when I'm surfing, my eyes aren't in the water, but I'm still kind of looking like I'm looking around. And that can reduce my chances of being approached. And I can show you guys a little video on just how sensitive they are to eye contact. So this is a tiger shark. This is Curly Girl. She's actually one of my favorites. You can see her curled dorsal. And this is generally what a tiger shark will look like, very slow. I'm swimming at her, so that's an aggressive maneuver. She turns away, right? Kind of gives me her shoulder, right? Like I turn back to the camera. She's very aware I'm not paying attention. I glance over my shoulder. She's like, oh, she saw me again. And she turns away. Oh, I have to go down. So your position in the water column also, us being up on the surface is actually saying that we're a more dominant species. If you drop down, it's kind of like a submissive dog, like when they'll lay down on their belly, and the more dominant dog will go over the top of them. So there's a couple of things that you can do as far as body language. As you notice in this clip, I'll just play it again so you guys can play it in the background. If I want to be aggressive towards her, so she's swimming in towards me like she's going to challenge me, swimming at her is very aggressive. if you guys see a tiger shark and you swim at the tiger shark, I'm saying like a 99% chance that shark is just going to be like, whoa, and think that you're another predator, right? But looking around, you can see how aware. And I realized that this video clip, I should have put a murky water one in there, but how sensitive they are just to the body movement of when I turn. So she can tell when I'm moving away from her. She can tell when I glance over my shoulder. Now for the photo ID, because every tiger shark that comes through, I want to see, oh, is this the tiger shark that we know? What I actually do is I ball up and I get really small, and I try not to look. So the tiger shark's coming in behind me, right? So I'll just kind of glance over my shoulder, just out of the corner of my mask, and I'll ball up and I'll look really, really, really small, so it feels, and still, really, they usually take a couple hours even then to come in, but eventually it'll come close enough and boom, and I turn and I get all my pictures, right? And I can see, and then they take off and they're usually gone, so.
Are you supposed to get big? They said.
Oh yeah, if you want to scare them away, you're supposed to get big, but I'm trying to like get them to come closer so I can get their picture. Yeah, you guys want to get, if you don't want the shark to approach you, you're not trying to take its picture for research and you want to scare it away, yeah, swim at it and make yourself look really big. So, sorry, I don't know why it's going on that. Avoids spear fishermen, line and net fishermen. So they, we call it palu. They'll put bait fish out in the water, and you'll see these guys, like, I mean, who hasn't swam, like, I really love, like, I wish that they would ban all the fishing over there on the corner, but Portlock Point, and it's like you're swimming between, like, fishing line, you know what I mean? And it kind of sucks, too, because you can get wrapped up in it, but also the guys are paluing, right? So they're basically chumming the water for you. You're welcome, right? And with the incidences on Maui, a couple of the areas where there were bites, that's an area that a lot of guys go out and spearfish, and there's more people that are getting into spearfishing every single year. Not to pick on anyone that spearfishes, I've got plenty of friends that spearfish too. But if you're spearfishing, don't string your fish on your belt. It's kind of like rubbing yourself with chocolate cake, and then the shark's like the starving fat kid, and like you just smell really good. And, you know, so don't put the fish on you. Put it on a line, or even better, get it out of the water. So actually put it in a float or some sort of device so there isn't blood going out, because it's like a little breadcrumb trail. And unfortunately, what some of the guys do, and I see it, is that they'll spear something and then they'll swim back into shore and they'll leave. But what they leave is like a little blood breadcrumb trail. And where do the sharks fall it into? All these just beachgoers, just swimmers, snorkelers who are completely unaware, who aren't looking around. The spear fisherman usually, by the time the spear fisherman's got what he's got, you know, and the sharks picked up the smell, spear fisherman's like, okay, I'm good, I'm gonna go. He doesn't have to deal with it, right? It's just wherever he left his little trail, or where they're cleaning at the shoreline. And usually the spear fisherman is looked at as a predator, because generally they're looking around. They're looking around for their next fish, right? Their whole body language is they are a predator. And so while they are more likely to encounter a shark, at the same time, it's less likely that the shark's just gonna come up to them because they look more threatening. They're looking around. So remove fish. Be aware of, you know, I mean, just the line fishermen, just for the palu effect, and so you don't get wrapped up in their fishing line. This should be a obvious. Don't swim if sharks are known to be present. If I'm surfing, and like I surf like Silver Channels, it's kind of a surf break that's further offshore, and I see, you know, a tiger shark dorsal at the surface or something, I'm not gonna go swim there. And the reason for that is there's probably something dead or dying on the reef. I can't smell it, but the sharks certainly can. And so it's their ocean, I give them the respect, I'll leave the water, and I won't go swim or surf there for the next day or two, because they're probably gonna search around the reef and try and find that dead honu or whatever is dead on that area. Now, after it's rained, we get a lot of stuff that flushes out of the rivers, right, the river mouths, and that's a lot of dead decaying material. Tiger sharks specifically, they really like the old dead stuff. They don't really usually want to deal with things that look too alive. Usually. There are opportunistic feeders, and there are exceptions if they're in a compromised position. That means that these guys can go months and months without eating. If you went 3 months without eating, shoot, if I went 3 days without eating, I might consider chewing on somebody's arm. But generally, and that's another theory, is that their natural prey items are in decline. We do know that fish stock populations are in decline. We do know that near shore species like turtles their numbers are increasing. So there's a lot of factors and a lot of theories and stuff in there. So be alert if turtles, seals, or other animals or fish are fleeing the area. I go through the International Shark Attack file, which isn't always the most in-depth or thorough, but looking at each one of the incidences and seeing like what's the other animal's behavior. When I go out and I'm surveying Galapagos and Sandbar sharks, if I start to see the Galapagos and Sandbar sharks kind of get like this, like, oh, somebody's behind me, just out of the blue, like, oh, they can tell, I know that there's a tiger shark in the area. And I would say 9 times out of 10, I get a tiger shark if I stay out there long enough. That's usually 2 hours for them to come in, a minimum of 2 hours. If all the sharks drop down and leave, I know there's a tiger shark in the area, and usually it comes in faster than 2 hours. So other animals can be a great indicator to whether there's a bigger, more dominant species in the area. So as we talk about the shark species, sandbars aren't the same as Galapagos. Galapagos are not the same as tigers. Tigers aren't the same as makos. Makos aren't the same as great whites. But you'll see differences in the way that they interact with one another, and there's a social hierarchy. There's a social hierarchy within the school, within the species, and there's a social hierarchy across species. We're not quite as dominant as a tiger, although we can be, as I showed you from the videos. But we are more dominant generally than a Galapagos shark and then a sandbar shark, and definitely more dominant than the little white tips that we see swimming around. Although every now and then they'll kind of swim at you, they're kind of cute. Stay in shallow water and close to shore. Percentage-wise, statistically, you're much less likely to encounter a shark if you're close to shore. And if you are going to encounter one, it's probably going to be one of those little ones. So that means that you could you're probably not going to see a Galapagos or a sandbar, which are the second and third larger species. The tiger sharks, while they can come in shallower, generally their ideal home range is usually like in the 100 to 600 foot depth range. Swim and surf and dive with friends, but not your pets, because the way that they're moving in the water is kind of that splashing albatross bird effect, and they smell differently, right? We smell like apple conditioner, and they smell more like fecal material, more like an animal. Okay, so worst comes to worst, and you're lucky enough to have an encounter with a shark. I know it may not seem like a lucky thing, but honestly, there's really not that many of them. And as we kind of surveyed before, it's like we've been swimming for a long time, or most of us have, and most people won't have an encounter with a shark. There's just not that many, and they can tell from a greater distance away that we're there, and they usually don't want anything to deal with it. Every time I have somebody out on the boat and they get to have a tiger shark come by and make a pass, it's usually one pass. And I'm like, go tell everybody that you just had an encounter with a tiger shark, because you're less than the fractional of a 1% that's actually had an encounter with a tiger shark. And what did that tiger shark do? It looked at you and it's like, I don't want anything to do with that, and it swam away. And that's generally what they're going to do. Now I'll spend hours out there trying to like win over their trust so I can get the ID photo or a tag. But generally, it's so easy to deter them to the point that like if I just swim out a little bit too fast to get the photo, they're usually gone. So, deterring a tiger shark. Actually, can I have my lovely assistant Juan? Sorry, I picked you out of doing an Instagram post, I'm sure. Okay, so Juan's gonna be my tiger shark. I'm gonna do this up on the stage, actually. You're gonna swim at me like a tiger shark. Come up here on the stage. Oh. I can show you guys a couple videos of actually doing this. So he's my tiger shark, and I'm swimming, and I'm like, oh, it's a tiger shark, okay, right? So he's swimming at me, a little bit, right? So he would be looking, I would just look at him, right? Very good impersonation, go back to that side. So I would look at him, it recognizes me, right? Now, if I wanted to be aggressive, I could swim at it, right? Chances are it's just gonna turn around. Let's say that this is a compromised tiger. That means it hasn't fed in months and it's just desperate. He's had his camera like ripped out of his hand because we were in the area where there were a bunch of competition or heat runs with whales. So what happens in the heat runs with the whales, they slam into each other, and there's a lot of whale blood in the water. And that's like, whale blood is like chocolate cake for the starving fat kid. It just smells amazing. And we don't tend to see as many tiger sharks during whale season because they're so busy chasing around the giant chocolate cakes. So if you want to have an encounter with a tiger shark during whale season, usually you want to jump in the water behind the whales, right? Or close to a birthing whale, right? Because they can eat the afterbirth. Or, you know, like if you hear a whale got hit by a boat and there's a dead whale carcass, if you want to see a tiger shark, go jump in next to the dead whale carcass, right? Don't do that. Okay, so he's going to swim at me, and it's kind of like a little kid like running at you. And I'm not like a football person, but I think it's called the Heisman. So when I have a territorial tiger shark coming in at me like this, you're just going to put your hand on top of the head, and you're going to lock out your elbow, and you're going to push it off to the side. So in the photo there, and I'll show you guys some video, but I can have this massive tiger shark. I mean, I've had like 16, 17-foot tiger sharks. You can do it one more time.
And they can't turn around either.
Oh, and their thoracic cavity, even though they're cartilaginous fishes, which means that they're basically the material of your ear, and it's very flexible. Tiger sharks, it's pretty funny to watch them. They generally can't turn around that fast, so it's kind of like, even once they make that pass, usually you would get quite a bit of time for them to make another turn. They look a little tubby. It's kind of cute. So one more time, yeah, you're done there. So lock out the elbow and then just kind of push them off to the side. It would probably take a lot of time for that to actually happen, but for people, if they actually saw it coming because they're looking around, remember rule number 1, just to look around. Thank you, my lovely assistant shark. Come on, sharks, good job. So for most people, if they're actually looking around, they see it, actually really easy to deter. It usually wouldn't even come up to that point. I've dove with thousands of tiger sharks, and it usually takes time for them to come up. Sometimes they'll come up a little hot, and then they see you, and they're like, whoa, what is that? You know, kind of thing, and they freak out a little bit, and then they'll take a long time to come back in. Worst case scenario, like in Tony's incident, turning around and hitting them in the face. They are so sensitive, and hopefully I'll have some time to show you guys some videos. So what I kind of demonstrated with Juan, that's Curly Girl and Candy Stripe. So Curly Girl is a less dominant shark. She's going to drop down. Otherwise, she risks a confrontation with Candy Stripe. I'm the next tiger shark in the area, so she's going to come up. I'm going to just knock her off to the side. And I would say she's probably, given my freedive blades are pretty long, maybe she's 9 feet, but I've done this a lot with other sharks. And it's kind of important to try and push on the top of their nose. Sometimes they'll push underneath, and it's so sensitive that they lift away almost like it's painful, and they'll actually open their lower jaw. I think this is just another angle. Oh, this is my POV, so my personal view. So right on the nose, lifts for a second, and just push her off.
That doesn't anger them?
No, that's a deterrent. So generally after that, they would kind of just leave. Honestly, I watched them for hours interacting with each other. They didn't want to try and challenge me. It eventually came to this after hours of watching them try and figure out, and it was finally that Curly Girl, because they're kind of close in size, finally Candy Stripe was kind of like, okay, I am the most dominant one, and Curly Girl showed she's dropping, and I was like, okay, then I'll be the next one to get challenged.
You had eye contact at a very close range, so why didn't that one turn away?
So the eye contact at a close range would work for a very long period of time. On that, essentially, she finally beat out Curly Girl, right? Maybe that's a little bit of a confidence boost. And the fact that I'm floating there looking very small and timid and not always totally looking at her, so kind of trying to get that approach there. But good question, I like that. Okay, and just to reiterate from the other side of things, if you guys want to increase your chances of encountering a shark, which would be like usually what I would want to do, go spearfishing. Spear fishermen actually would be the ones that are much more likely. Wear bright contrasting colors, fluorescents or whites. Splash around and make a lot of noise like you're injured. Float just like you're dead. That doesn't look very threatening. These are things to do if you want the shark to approach you, right? Don't look around when you go in the shark's home. just one direction, or don't pay attention at all. Swim, surf, spearfish, or freedive far offshore near drop-offs or areas where there's upwelling and nutrients. Hang out in murky water near harbor entrances especially. I do have a study on another island where we're looking at changes in tiger shark behavior due to human influences in harbors, as in all the fishing vessels are coming into the harbor and they clean their catch, right? Who hasn't been to a harbor in Hawaii where like you go into the harbor and you see like floating dead fish? Well, what happens is as the tide drops, all those fish guts get flushed out, and oftentimes they get flushed through surf lineups, right? And so it's kind of putting surfers at risk, and it's, you know, knock on wood, like, that we actually don't have more incidences given the amount of fish guts that are going into harbor entrances off of fishing vessels. And river openings, especially during this time of year. It's just the start of winter. We have heavy rains and all this stuff that's been kind of sitting and rotting all of a sudden is flushed out. It smells different, right? And they're just curious, and they're going to go in and investigate and see if there's an easy meal there. Frequent the water alone, early morning and late in the evening. Honestly, if you look at the incidences, the time of day, it's not necessarily like, it's not a definite, like sharks are only there in the morning and they're only there in the evening. Actually, a lot of the species that I study, the ones with the tags, I actually see that they go offshore during the night. But it's not always the case. The bigger thing is to, you know, swim with a friend. You look like a larger animal, right? Than if you're by yourself. You look a lot less threatening and smaller. Size does matter in the shark world. Make yourself look as small as possible, perfect. So you're more likely to be approached on a short board versus on a long board. So these are all the things that you're kind of like not supposed to do. Unless you want to see a shark, like you're like me. And then worst case scenario, I am a CPR first aid AED, that's automated external defibrillation, an emergency oxygen instructor, on-site neurological assessment, and hazardous marine life injuries, which would be shark incident, and a wilderness medic. So I work around the world with sharks, so I have all those like things. The worst case scenario, even our team, we go through the use of tourniquets. And generally, people don't die because they were eaten by a shark. They die from blood loss. So it's a matter of controlling that. And that should be #1 priority. Look at the shark, right? Hit it if you need to. And then tourniquet. I mean, if you could do it in the water, I understand like in a panic situation because we run drills and stuff for different productions. But controlling blood loss. All it takes is a liter of blood generally, and people can actually lose consciousness after a liter of blood. We only have about 6 there. So yeah, just consideration for blood loss. And the faster that you alert EMS, the faster that they'll get there, and they have much more advanced life-saving technology, and they can make a huge difference. But for the layman, just tourniqueting it, and you know, like the kayakers were great. From what I heard of the incident, it sounds like Tony was swimming with a friend, but they weren't close to each other. You know, so the other swimmer didn't even know that there was an incident for a little while. The other kayaker had to go over and alert his friend. So swimming closer, you know, makes you less likely to be approached, but also you're more efficient because you can draft your partner, right? You have better swim times. Just kidding. Reality check is, you guys were more likely to die driving here tonight. So don't text and drive. Selfies is the latest one. Selfies kill more people than sharks do. Mosquitoes. I heard that there was some dengue reported. Was it dengue that was reported on the Big Island even? Yeah, okay, 725,000 people die from a mosquito bite. Other humans, mammals, they can be so moody, right? Snakes, we don't have to worry about that here. Dogs, maybe. But sharks, it's usually, you know, it's 5 to 7 is actually the average, and we were actually below average for the number of adverse interactions. And it's usually the blood loss. Falling coconuts, silly things like falling out of bed in the morning, you would be shocked how many people. But if we want to just keep it just to the ocean, right? Because you're thinking like, well, this is everybody in the world. Well, let's think about drownings. I am so glad all you guys can swim, right? Because look how many people die from drownings. It's crazy. You know how many like tourists we come here and like, or get here and like they just get swept off the rocks or out to seas and rip currents and things like that. So you guys are way above the curve by knowing how to swim. Jellyfish, use some sort of lycra protection or something like that. We've seen box jellies and things out here. Jellyfish kill 40 people every single year. And we do get jellyfish as well. Who's been stung by a blue bubble? It's like a relative of the Portuguese man o' war. I've been stung by tons of them. It is so painful. Oops, I went back up. So, and then I have to share this because, you know, traveling around the world and working every day with sharks, the reality is that sharks are really important, and a lot of people don't know that. If they watch TV and all they know about sharks is that they have teeth, they don't realize that actually, existing for 450 million years, they've shaped the marine ecosystem that we rely on. It's called a trophic cascade, and there's study after study that shows that you remove sharks, you have population booms in lower trophic levels, and that can affect everything down to the fish that we have to eat, the marine ecosystems. It's a trickle effect, right? So fisheries collapse if we have the removal of sharks. And even if you're like, I'm a vegetarian, 70% of the air that we breathe comes from the oceans, and sharks are a vital component to that. They're the white blood cells. So we do need sharks. And I think here, like, out of many places that I travel, generally, most people here in Hawaii, you know, it's like we're a little bit more in tune and respectful of nature. So most people are just kind of like Jada was saying, you know, it's their ocean, they need to be there, they need to exist. It's so rare that we actually have an adverse interaction. It's so rare to the point that it's almost not worth worrying about it. But if you can do something to avoid it, to reduce your chances of an interaction, you know, you assess the water and you're like, hey, it's murky, I'm gonna swim closer to shore today, kind of thing. Or I'm gonna swim with my buddy, or I'm gonna swim with more people, or avoiding those drop-offs. And also, a reality check for sharks is actually, sharks have a lot more to fear from us than we do from them. If you think about the number of incidences that happen every year the other way, man, if sharks like knew what we were doing to them, like if they could understand, that 3 sharks are killed every second. So at the top you can see the people, right? And that's, I think it's about 10 people. This is just for finning. So it's 70 to 100 million sharks, and all those little red dots, those are significant of the sharks that are being killed every single hour. I can't even fit it on one slide. That's the second slide, that's the third slide, that's the fourth slide. Mostly shark fin soup, and people don't know or care, right? Hollywood's made a lot of money demonizing and sensationalizing sharks and scaring everybody, right? Bad news sells, I guess. So these are still, this is the number of sharks that will be killed in the hour that I was talking with you guys. So over 11,000 sharks are killed every single hour. And you're like, how is that even possible? Like, how are there even that many sharks? Well, there's not. And they're apex predators. They're slow to reproduce. They have long gestation periods, many species longer than us. And they pup to few young. And they reach sexual maturity late in life. So they're not a sustainable fishery. And that means you can't keep fishing and fishing and fishing them. So what's happened is that sharks have been fished at this rate for the last 3 to 4 decades. And now their population status is less than 10% for most species and less than 5% for a good chunk of them that we are actually able to survey. So sharks are kind of on the brink right now, and we're seeing damage to coral reefs and fisheries because of that. There's that speculation that fish stock populations are due to crash in 2048. And some of it, I mean, it's things like, who's been to Waikiki and seen those terrible like shark tooth necklaces, right? Well, they're not all from fossils, right? Sometimes they just kill them just for souvenirs or fetus things. Culling, there was actually culling done in Hawaii. Luckily, the boats were burned down by people who still respect the environment, the culture. Shark cartilage pills. I just got a text from somebody the other day saying that somebody, I think it's like Walmart or Walgreens, is actually selling shark cartilage pills. There's this, it's just a cultural belief that sharks don't get sick. That's not true. They actually do get cancer. They do get sick as well. And so for the importance of the marine ecosystem and for, you know, kids' futures and things like that too, we do need sharks, you know, and they're part of the ecosystem. And if you think of wild animals and those statistics when the reality check slide, is that for wild animals, like, and we're in their environment, most of the time none of us are even paying attention, like, it's very rare that they make a mistake. And that's a testament to their sensory systems and their long evolutionary history. So for the future, if you guys, you know, I guess it's kind of hard in certain situations, but just kind of helping spread awareness for the marine environment, even if it's not just for sharks. I know there's a lot of people out there that love dolphins and love whales, Well, Lahaina used to be a huge whaling port, right? They used to just slaughter whales by the dozen. And now they're realizing that, oh, whales are actually important fertilizers. Well, same thing for the sharks. So just spreading awareness. This picture, I don't think I can use my cursor. But the guy in the photo, that's taken off of Oahu, actually. But that's Mike Coots. He's from Kauai. And he lost his lower leg to a tiger shark. And the guy is such an inspiration, just an incredible person, a great example of the respect that someone who even lost their leg, he speaks up for sharks. He travels around and just such a wonderful, positive person. He's a great athlete. He's a really good surfer. He's an in-water photographer, holds no animosity, and there he is, he's diving with the sharks.
What was the circumstances that he lost his leg?
He thinks that there was like a cruise ship that was dumping some stuff offshore, and maybe it was just the current that was drifting in, but he was surfing a surf break off of the north shore of Kauai, and he was kind of far out. The visibility wasn't that good. And everybody knows Bethany Hamilton, you know what I mean, kind of thing, small and on a surfboard. I know Colin Cook from the North Shore on his tiny little green shortboard, not even really moving around, just sitting, waiting, floating, right? So that could be an investigation. The guy that paddled over to him, Keone Kabauthorpe, that saw the incident, he's been out with me swimming with the sharks a lot, and he's like, everybody else paddled in. There was even a firefighter out there. Everyone paddled in. But Keone's like, well, I've been out there. I've seen what sharks are really like. I'm going to go over. And he saved his life. So
This is at Leftovers.
This was at Leftovers on the North Shore, yeah. So it's just showing a different side to the animal and keeping in perspective that it's like how many people go in the water, you know, and how often do they go in the water, and how many times do you actually even see a shark, let alone like have an adverse interaction. And of those interactions, most are not going to be fatal.
Is that murky at Leftovers that day?
There was a portion of it, and the interesting thing actually about it is that Leftovers, for that whole North Shore area, you guys know there's like a ton of surfers out there, right? For that whole North Shore area, there's been 3 incidences over a very long period of time, and they've been at Leftovers. So it's probably one of those more sought after territories for predation for sharks. And so identifying aggregates, that's kind of where my research kind of comes in. So identifying aggregate areas. Fishermen are very good people to talk to because they see sharks and they kind of know aggregate areas. But you guys might even know from swimming, there's probably areas that you guys see sharks more than others. You can talk to local spear fishermen as well. I know over on the east side, there's certain areas you can just fire a gun or make the sound of a gun, and you'll get sharks that will come because they've learned that they can steal fish from the prep chefs, right? The spear fishermen, right? So continual spear fishing in the same area increases the chances that the sharks are going to be in that area. And that's the same study that we're doing with the harbor mouths or entrances, is that there are certain areas that maybe you're more likely to encounter a shark. And that could be a human influence thing. So it may not have always been like that, but all of a sudden somebody's using that area and they're spearfishing all the time. They're following and they're not thinking about, oh, I throw in some fish guts to pollo to attract my fish, and the current's taking it into shore. I've heard about productions doing that. They don't think about where the current's going, and they actually had a bodyboarder bit and killed off of South Africa because they were just, you know, just thinking like, oh, I'll just dump some fish guts out for this TV shoot or something, and they don't think about what direction the current's going. It's going into shore. So being really aware of your surroundings, and that's not just in the water, but kind of like, you see the dive flags? Those are spear fishermen, right? You don't want to be swimming down current of them. It's unfortunate, but like everybody uses the ocean, you know, so can't really say, hey, don't do that. You know, just adapt your own behavior. The value of a live shark, areas like Tiger Beach in the Bahamas or Palau. Palau's one of the largest marine protected areas. They don't have problems. Like French Polynesia's got hundreds of sharks, and they don't have adverse interactions. It's a healthy ecosystem. They didn't cull at one time. They didn't try and kill a bunch of sharks off. Don't buy products if you guys want to help sharks. Start a conservation effort where there is none. Support where it exists. Just educating kids and stuff in school. We do keiki outreach programs, so we go into the schools. We'll go into like the younger age kid schools all the way up through. I go speak at UH. And do public presentations as well. And just the awareness of sharks, the awareness and the importance of their marine environment, and obviously the behavior as well, and how we can adapt our own behavior when we factor in their behavior. And yeah, it's just, I think from everybody that I talked to already, you guys all have like that, and even Tony, and even Colin Cook from Leftovers, it's like he knows that like, hey, it's their home, I'm visiting, you know, if an incident happens, I'm not going to blame the animal, I'm not going to go out and kill all the sharks. Like if somebody goes out into an African savanna and they get attacked by a lion, we don't go out there and, you know, kill all the lions. They have a purpose and a role in their ecosystem. So it's just a matter of adapting our own behavior. And we can enjoy the water, we can enjoy the ocean, we can coexist, and just adapting our behavior and maybe looking around a little bit more and just being a little bit more aware can help reduce that. And I've seen a lot of that with my behavior stuff. If you guys want to learn more, because I can't share everything because you guys would fall asleep. Yeah.
What about the shark shield? Swimmers just swim with a shark shield.
Yeah, I actually have 3 of those in my living room right now that I'm going to go test out 3 of the new latest development ones. So what I can do is once we do that testing, I can send that email out maybe to Jada and she can send it out to everybody. Because people ask me all the time about the shark shields, but what happens is that ampullae of Lorenzini, the electroreceptor, which is what that's trying to work with, is that it's different for different water temperatures and it's different for different species. Because not all species want to go after the same prey item, and not all of them are sensitive to this amplitude or this amplitude or this amplitude. So I'm going to do some tests here locally with the devices that have been shipped to me from Australia, and there's one from California. Actually, I think there's 2 from Australia, and there's 1 local one. And so we're gonna actually go out and we're gonna test it on local species, and we'll try and test it on tiger sharks too. Maybe I can get some video footage and stuff. But I'm the same way. I don't like to say anything unless it's been proven. So theoretically, it can deter them by overriding those sensory systems, by almost creating like, it would be like touching a piece of ice, let's say that. Like, you know, it's like at first it would be okay, and then you're like, that's cold. You don't want to keep your hand there. So kind of painful in that way. Or by touching like a hot surface. Yes?
I was watching the Discovery Channel a couple of years ago, and they developed this shark repellent system that used dead shark meat. They fermented the shark meat, they dropped it in the water in a little sack, they opened the sack up, and sharks that surrounded the area split in 10 directions. So
he's saying that in Shark Week that they fermented the shark meat itself, and that a dead shark would actually deter. That was the thing. So here's the thing. Tiger sharks will eat their own kind. This is not a, not a good one.
Sure look convincing in the video.
I know. That's Shark Week. I know, but that's just the production. I refuse to do Shark Week because it's not educational, and there's just some guy in the production saying, let's do that kind of thing.
That's not a good deterrent.
No, it's not. And I went over to Western Australia when they started culling, because Hawaii had done the culling years and years and years back, and it did nothing to reduce adverse interactions. And if anything, it's what developed the theory that removing large sharks leaves any given territory open to 3 younger, smaller ones. So you're taking 1 shark out, but you're getting 3 younger juveniles. Juveniles are like teenagers, right? They're like, what is this kind of thing? They gotta go in, whereas you're actually kind of safer with the older, larger, more kind of established ones that know they've run into something that didn't really go so well, so they're even more cautious. And I do tend to find that actually the larger sharks are more cautious. So culling is like shooting yourself in the foot, and it's unfortunate for me knowing that, like, hey, a tiger shark wasn't even involved in an incident there since 1919. They're targeting them indiscriminately. But what was happening is that they were using these baited drums within a kilometer of shore, and the tiger shark would get hooked up. And what they were finding was that if they didn't get out there and remove the tiger shark, another tiger shark would go in and feed, and all that is positive reinforcement for the tiger sharks to move in closer to shore. So culling, again, like, bad idea. Like, it's really like shooting yourself in the foot and making the problem worse. But also, some species will actually eat their own kind. Remember, their whole role in the ecosystem: pick off dead, dying, weak, sick, injured. It doesn't matter who it is and what it is. Tiger sharks are very much, they have that niche of picking off that dead thing so that disease doesn't spread. And they're generally non-confrontational. So yeah, it's Discovery Channel. I can't talk about that enough. There are some good programs. you were... Yeah, so you're saying that a lot of the attacks are from behind. And if you think about the guys that go through the jungle where there's actually tigers, like land terrestrial tigers, they'll put like a mask on the back of their head because they know that predators like to come up behind. That's the smart, intelligent thing. And generally, if you were gonna be predated on, you wouldn't even see it coming unless you were actually looking around, because they are good at coming up from behind. I've been freediving with him, and he's like, hey, you just got checked out by a juvenile tiger shark, or hey, you just got checked out by a black tip, or hey, you just got checked out by this or that. And it's like, you guys would be surprised how many times you guys have probably been checked, because I look around, like I think I look around, right? You'd be surprised how many times you've probably been checked out by a shark and you didn't even know it. Go in that Pacific monitoring system and look at how many tags, because you guys are east side and south shore. On North Shore, I can see like, oh, okay, yesterday I swam with 11 tiger sharks. I didn't see any of them, but I was swimming with them, right? You can ask your friends over on Maui where there's more tags there and be like, oh, I was swimming with a lot of tiger sharks. I didn't have an incident. It's not that suddenly there are sharks here. The sharks have always been here. It's just that maybe it's that time of year. Maybe it is a pregnant female that just came into Kaneohe Bay or that area to pup. She hasn't fed in a few months. She's very depleted on reserves, and she's in a compromised position. Very rare, but maybe, you know, it's very rare, but maybe that was the situation. So we count.
So when the news has been stating that October, November,
yeah.
Isn't that a broad generalization to basically communicate to the public, oh, stay out of the ocean in October, November. October,
yeah.
Novembers have been around from the dawn of time.
Yeah.
And there's not been any more. Is that correct?
So the thing is that, like she was saying, October and November, statistically, you're more likely to have an adverse interaction because we're seeing 1/3 of the tagged female tiger sharks coming down. So we're theorizing that they're pupping. So are your chances increased during that time period? Well, statistically, or based off the set, yeah, they could be statistically more increased during that time period. However, if you look at the pattern long term, yeah, we actually do have more incidences around this time of year. That could be from rains and things and flooding off, or it could be from pupping. Do you have to stay out? No, I would just say, hey, if it's murky water, maybe stay out. You know, it's like, do you really need to, or can you go swim somewhere else? Or can you swim with more buddies, kind of thing like that. You're weighing your options kind of thing, and you take that risk when you go into their environment, but you realize, like, is their environment. Also factor in, and this is something that kind of contributed to an article for, is that there are more people now than ever that are going into the water, into the shark's home, going further offshore. We have better wetsuits and things like that. We can spend more time in the water. There's more spear fishermen, right? There's more kayak fishermen. There are less fish, so they're natural, you know, prey items too. So there's a lot of different factors, but if you consider how many more people, and how many more people have GoPros in the water too, you know, and the way that we communicate through social media, it's like, guys off of South Point on Big Island, those guys see sharks all the time, but you would never hear about it. Now it's like he's got his cell phone out there and he's like, hey, I just saw a shark. So the perception basis that, oh, there's more sharks, it's actually, our current population status is actually that it's still declining. It's just that you're hearing about it maybe more. But as far as adverse interactions, no. And if you look at patterns, and you have to look at them in science, we got to look at patterns long term, because you can get El Nino, La Nina effect. There are some years that could be more incidences, less incidences, but we also need to look at the human actions and behavior, right? Are there more people? What are they doing? What are they, you know, what kind of activities are they, you know, kind of playing around with? I actually don't know. Oh, if you guys do, and I really, really encourage you to do this, what we have is oneoceandiving.org. We have a program. It's called the Pelagic Animal Research and Interaction Program. So we go out. Our data set, we survey for behavior, IDs, population status, correlation studies, 15 days of the month, but we try and go almost every single day to have a more accurate survey. But you guys can come out when we collect research. We have a group of trained marine biologists. We don't take people out when we're tagging, and we don't take people out to every aggregate site, but you guys actually get to learn about the animal's biology and physiology, and then you get to get in the water with myself or another marine biologist, and we point out that behavior. So you get to see a shark eye to eye, face to face. And I know that sounds probably like face your fears, but honestly, it's like 90% of the people that go on the boat terrified of sharks. 100% walk away feeling way more confident and knowledgeable about sharks, and a lot better and stuff in the water. And what we've done for you guys for this program specifically is if you guys go on oneoceandiving.com and you click on a date that you want to go, there's a promo code. It's Swim Club. if you guys put in swim club, it gives you a $20 discount, and it also donates $20 towards Tony's thing. So it's kind of like double reason for you guys to go out and learn more about the animals and actually get to interact with them. And it's like Keone that saved Colin. It was because he had gone out on that program, and it kind of had empowered him to be like, okay, I know enough about sharks, so I'm gonna go over there and see what I can do. I did a TED Talk. I know you wouldn't guess because my presentation style is terrible, but I'm not really that good at presenting in public. But how sharks affect us all. And this is just another thing, just to learn a little bit more about the animals. The research program. And Sylvia Earle, she's an internationally kind of well-known marine biologist, but she just says sharks are beautiful and important animals, and if you're lucky enough to see lots of them, that means you're in a healthy ocean. You should be afraid if you're in the ocean and you don't see sharks. And this is actually in the main Hawaiian Islands, like the correlation studies between here and Palmyra. Palmyra is like 45% top predator heavy, and their fish stocks are thriving. When you go out in the water, I see less and less sharks, I see less and less fish, and I see more and more fishing line and plastic. So it's kind of like, at the current present moment, shark populations are declining, and they're being replaced by plastic. I mean, you guys go to the beach, and it's like marine debris is very prevalent. Well, thank you guys so much for your time. I sincerely appreciate it.